Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud, while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 3 of Little Blue Book number 1069, titled The Conquest of Fear, written by Leo Markun. There is no copyright date in this one, but Leo Markun died of suicide in 1931, 32, late 31, either way. So this was written before that point in time. So in part 3, we are going to pick up with chapter, and it's not numbered, so we're just going to give you the title. The chapter titled Fear in Courtship, and that's where we begin. As Havelock Ellis has well pointed out, fear plays an important part in every wooing. It is, he says, usually on the part of the female, but not invariably. Among spiders, for instance, it is usually on the part of the male. On the female's part, courtship is a skillful manipulation of her own fears and modesty. That fundamental attitude of the female in courtship is nothing but an amalgamation of fears. As for the male wooer, it is often important that he should not show his fear. He may have to fight with his rivals for his best beloved, and he is more likely to be defeated in the combat if he is afraid. Of course, he can be sure of the preservation of his own life if he flees, but in this way he gives up the possibility of mating and assisting in the continued life of his species. In the human society of today, the male who lacks in courage is sometimes at a special advantage. If he fails to woo the female because of his nervous fears, he may provoke her to woo him. There can be no doubt that slightly neurotic young men sometimes seem to be desirable to young women because they are not over-eager in their wooing. Perhaps none but the brave deserve the fair. Yet the fair may resent too direct an attack upon their affections. Incidentally, the shy male wooer may be courageous enough in his dealings with hostile men and animals. Lack of one sort of fear does not inevitably imply the lack of other kinds. Westermarck defines sexual modesty as the fear of or the tendency to avoid anything which would arouse sexual shame. However, the coy female is probably afraid not so much of the idea of the sexual function as of the male himself, especially in the lower animals. And sexual modesty in the human being appears to be essentially the same as the sexual coyness of the other animals. We must look for a concrete fear rather than an abstract one. It is almost always the male who approaches the female. However, the passivity of the female, as has been remarked, is like the passivity of a magnet. There are cases, too, even in human society, where it is considered proper for the female to woo the male. Usually the female is coy and resists, to a greater or lesser extent, the approaches of the male. What precise biological purpose the modesty and the coyness of the female serve has not been fully determined. All the dancing and singing and playing of courtship help to arouse the ardency of the male and to promote the fecundity of the female. No doubt the excitement makes more likely that all the conditions necessary for impregnation will be fulfilled. If we wish to learn how coyness has arisen, however, we must perhaps consider more than the purpose it serves. As we know, there must be a certain force attracting male to female and female to male if reproduction is to take place. If the male were anxious to have physical contact with the female, and the female were equally anxious to avoid such contact, the frequency of collation would depend upon the comparative swiftness, agility, and strength of the two sexes. However, the female, except for some reason she is unprepared to have sexual relations with the male, employs only part of her swiftness and strength in fleeing from him. Nevertheless, this half-playful coyness of the female seems to represent, or to be a relic of, an absolute determination to escape the embraces of the male. Female and male do not always attain sexual heat at the same time. When the primitive women were prepared for cohabitation, her impulses to wait for her lover became at least equal to her instinctive tendencies to flee from him. However, the flight impulse has never disappeared. Maiden coyness is in part the result of the customary education of girls, which has, to be sure, undergone some important changes during the last few decades. But in large measure, it was an artless expression of fear. Perhaps this fear is not easy. Perhaps this fear is not easy to analyze. The dread of the unknown may be part of it. The embrace of man and woman may, to the uninitiated, seem a great deal like a struggle. Very likely, an emotional confusion exists in the coy maiden, and the feeling that we should expect to send her into her lover's arms moves her in the opposite direction. Brutal awkwardness on the part of the human male wooer sometimes causes such a shock to the nervous system of a young woman that she remains long afterward afraid of the love act. On the other hand, the lover may easily be too timid, too much afraid of wounding maidenly coyness. End of that chapter. Next chapter, fear and conduct. Before we consider the ethical significance of fear, it may be well to notice that the word stands for at least two different concepts. We have considered it as an emotion accompanied by reflex actions tending to accelerate fright. For this reason, I put quotation marks around the word in one place where it meant something different. But the careful reader must already have noticed that fear as the vocable is commonly used, implies emotion, consciousness, and action. We fear because we tremble can be expressed more accurately as we feel and know that we are afraid or feel afraid and are conscious of danger immediately after we tremble and prepare for flight. When an ethical philosopher says that men are afraid of the consequences of certain actions and consequently avoid them, he may mean simply that they understand the hazards attached to them. Consider, however, the gibbet upon which the bodies of executed criminals used formerly to be left to rot or to be eaten by birds. The idea was, of course, that young men who were considering the advantages of a life of crime would see the warning as they walked or rode by on the king's highway, that they would be horrified, and that they would henceforth be honest, law-abiding subjects. Undoubtedly, a child who was taken for the first time to witness a hanging, or a drawing and a quartering, or who came upon the rotting body of a robber, did tremble with fear at the sight. But presently, in medieval Europe, the boy or girl became more or less accustomed to public executions and to exposing of bodies. These practices coarsened men and women. They blunted emotions and tended to make life appear cheap. Consequently, instead of serving to discourage crime, they actually increased it. Fear seemed to become converted into a lust for blood. Whenever a human being becomes in any way highly excited, he sees red. That is to say, the feelings are to a large extent interchangeable. The nervous system is complex and not altogether perfect. Fear may very easily arouse rage, just as it may bring out feelings of love. Evidently, then, to associate a certain act with nervous trembling is not always enough to prevent that act from being carried out. As we have observed, soldiers are always frightened as they enter a battle, yet most of them are entirely willing to keep on fighting. Men fight because they enjoy it. Now that we have well-organized conscription systems and the persons who arrange for a war are seldom the same who fight for it, my statement may seem somewhat inaccurate, and yet it is substantially true. Fear is, in general, an unpleasant emotion. Nevertheless, strong fear, like other feelings which arouse all the glands and muscles of the body, is often deliberately sought out. Men and women, especially when they are young and healthy, do dangerous things just because they are dangerous. It is well known that the Volstead law and the various state laws which prohibit the sale and the purchase of intoxicating beverages have brought about drinking among boys and girls of high school and college age to an extent never previously existing. The statement frequently made by psychologists and sociologists that human beings always seek what is pleasant and avoid that which is unpleasant or painful is not altogether true. It may be argued, of course, that the hero who thinks that dying for his country is sweet and seemingly really feels no pain in his martyrdom because he is thoroughly absorbed in the joy of his self-sacrifice. Some of the religious victims appears to have been affected by the thought of eternal bliss as an anesthetic or by a alchem- alchemic elixir capable of turning pain into pleasure. Herbert Spencer and his disciples, in seeking natural bases and reasons for man-made morality, have been somewhat puzzled to account for the fact that pleasure and pain may be mingled as the result of a certain action. Human beings frequently do unpleasant things willingly, in order to prevent still more unpleasant things in the future. The teaching that pleasant actions are such as tend to preserve the existence of the individual and species is palpably imperfect. The mother tends to protect the life and the comfort of her child, even at the cost of her own discomfort or death. This impulse, indeed, works for the perpetuation of the species. When, however, one Baptist is willing to die at the hands of another rather than to renounce his special ideas as congregational self-government, he does not appear to be serving his own pleasure. Certainly, so far as I can see, he is not helping the human race to survive. The man who enjoys eating or drinking or indulging in lechery in such a way and to such an extent that he shortens his own life seems to offer sufficient disproof of the statement that the pleasurable and the life preservative are identical. It has been said that this difference can exist only in an unhealthy organism. In a perfectly healthy individual, according to the Spencerians, every pleasurable impulse would be beneficial. The baby which eats sugar of lead because it is sweet, like candy, is not entirely healthy, not entirely adapted to its environment. Perhaps we might regulate our actions entirely according to our hopes and our fears, if we were such perfect creatures as the philosophers have imagined. However, we are all imperfect, and it is true that we can perfect ourselves by throwing our reason and and adapting to oops and adapting to rely upon our emotions. Let us consider a perfectly healthy dog which comes upon a piece of meat in the entrance hall of its master's house. It is, let us suppose, rather hungry. The meat is in an unusual place. Put this fact, yeah, it is an unusual place. Okay, but this fact, the word was half scrambled, but this fact is hardly enough to cause suspicion in even an intelligent dog. The creature sniffs at the unexpected treat. Everything seems satisfactory. It eats the meat eagerly. Yet the food may be poisoned. It may have been thrown in by a burglar, desirous of killing the watchdog in order that he may carry away his spoils undisturbed. Yet there has been no indication of evil. There has been absolutely nothing to inspire fear. The dog is afraid of the food only if the smell or the appearance of it is unusual. Men and women, too, are without adequate safeguards against poisons and injuries. They go out into the woods and admire beautiful ivy. Very soon they begin to itch and to realize that they had touched a poisonous variety. They teach their children then to avoid this particular plant. Perhaps they fill them also with a dread of the unknown. We have already considered how important the dread of strange persons and things is. In primitive morality, especially, it is the leading principle. Many taboos which have perhaps been important in the past, but which are now, because of our greater knowledge and understanding of the world, merely useless or even harmless relics, manage to survive. Thus, the ancient Hebrews appear to have known that the disease which we call trichinosis, trichnos, trichin, trichinosis, is caused by a parasitic worm which are frequently found in swine. This, it seems, is the reason why the eating of pork was forbidden. The Orthodox Jew of today, if they ate ham and bacon, which has been properly inspected and cooked, would be in no great danger of falling ill with trichinosis. The old warning, the old fear, the old prohibitions are outworn, but the law stands even if it is no longer enforced by judges having power to order the death of the offender. The ridicule and the contempt of his fellows are likely to restrain the thoughtless breaker of such a law from repeating his offense. In McDougall's words, fear of physical punishment inflicted by the anger of his fellows must have been the great agent of discipline of primitive man. Through such fear, he must first have learned to control and regulate his impulses in accordance with the needs of social life. Erwin Edmund adds that the less intelligent and the less socially minded are still kept law-abiding because they fear punishment. How are we to explain the criminal? Is he incapable of fear? We might just as reasonably ask, how are we to explain the daring aviator and the willing soldier? Are they devoid of the emotion of fear? There are several aspects to the matter. That there is attractive as well as repulsive power in fear is a very important fact. Moreover, the soldier does not enter the battle expecting to be slain, or if he does think that his regiment is to be entirely wiped out, he may yet be led by his patriotic feelings and fight bravely. Very often, the criminal has an idea of honor which leads him to break the law. He may want to revenge himself for the death of a comrade or a member of his family. He is not deterred, then, by the fear that he may be slain in his turn. We read sometimes of attorneys fined for contempt of court, or pugnacious persons sent to jail for a few days because of an assault who says it was worth it. There are bootleggers who consider that being fined every few months is part of the normal course of their business. In some cities, prostitutes are brought every now and then before a police magistrate and made to hand over a sum of money to the clerk. They consider the amount of the fine as a sort of license fee. Even the possibility of a term of imprisonment may be considered a business risk. The aviator who carries the mails is aware of the possibility of being killed or maimed in an accident. The burglar knows that the next filling station attendant or bank teller whom he calls on for his money, or the next peaceful citizen whom he awakens out of his bed, may be ready to shoot him or able to turn him over to the police. This, too, is a risk incident of the profession. The highwayman's life, if frequently short, is usually merry. The penitentiary looms up in the distance, perhaps, but people who are absorbed in their work do not brood over such unpleasant matters. It is perhaps true that the fear of punishment would deter more persons if the guilty were always caught. However, it does not take much intelligence to realize that such is not the case. Honest men have sufficient fears of their own. Many of them are in such a position that they may at any time through the fault of some other persons or of conditions over which they have absolutely no control, lose their positions or be forced to a lower economic level. Millions of people living in civilized communities live from hand to mouth. Some, pers- some persons are so constituted that the fear of losing their positions is something that they can never forget. Their very anxiety, it may be added, is capable of reducing their efficiency as workmen and of producing the result which they fear. The cunning lawbreaker does not, then, stand in any special position with regard to the dangers of his calling. Frequently, he is admired for his courage, especially if the laws which he breaks and the authority which he denies are unpopular in his community. The fear of arousing the disapproval of one's neighbors keeps many persons from doing as they should like. The knowledge that an action will be generally approved may, on the other hand, cause it to be carried out despite the fact that physical pain is attached to it. Fears frequently pull an individual in two directions at once. Here is the fear of dishonor, there is the fear of death. A man sometimes attempts to weigh the two dangers to decide which of the two is more to be dreaded. This is well enough, but the conflict should preferably be forgotten when one course of action has been chosen. The medieval schoolmen were fond of arguing how a donkey would behave if placed at the same distance from each of two equally attractive bundles of hay. The usual opinion was that the creature would be unable to determine in which direction to move, and that it would consequently starve to death. Perhaps some people are in this position with regard to conflicting fears and hopes. They are unable to decide what to avoid and what to seek. Consequently, they do nothing at all. We have seen that even a single fear may paralyze. Elaborate systems of government prohibitions tend to destroy character. A man should learn himself, by going down the road of excess, to recognize the palace of wisdom. More than this, good people need to disturb us with their ridiculously unnecessary fears, granting that they are right when they produce statistics to demonstrate that the man who smokes cigarettes loses 3 weeks, or whatever the figure is, accepted by the Anti-Tobacco League, may be, of his natural life. Why should they annoy the smoker with the fact? He may lose 10 days more worrying about the matter. In most cases, the person who does what he enjoys doing is likely to live longer and to perform his work more efficiently than the person who is hedged about with restrictions. The inadequacy of the fear motive comes out clearly in every slave state. The sight of the lash has never made a man put forth his best efforts. The slave thinks of avoiding a whipping, not of doing good work. Except in certain forms of rude agricultural work, free labor is likely to be cheaper than slave labor. The free working man is restrained from idleness both by the fear that he and his family will starve to death if he does not work, and by the hope of advancement, of gaining luxuries and power. The people of the tropics, if we are to believe the comic pictures, spend their days with their mouths open, lying under banana trees, waiting for the fruit to ripen and drop in. Farther north, the fear of cold and hunger makes men build houses and devise ways of heating them, accumulate stores of food to be consumed during the winter. In Arctic regions, it takes all the energy of the people to maintain their lives. In temperate regions, civilization arises and advances. But are the things which we most value in life products of fear? Originally, I think we are safe in saying music, drawing, and sculpture, poetry, had little or nothing to do with the emotion of fear. In certain times, men and women have worked at the arts, especially at literature, in order to keep off starvation. We must consider, however, that poverty has frequently caused artists to devote themselves to mere hack work. On the whole, it is difficult to decide whether persons capable of doing great things in the arts ought or ought not to have independent incomes. Perhaps it depends upon the individual. There have been many poets and other artists who toiled away to perfect their work despite the fact that they expected no punctuary reward for it. The nature of the creative impulse has been hotly debated in recent years by many persons interested in sociological questions. It has been contended by the opponents of socialism and communism that invention and artistic labor will cease as soon as the motives of fear and hope are removed. It has been said, on the other hand, that the impulse to create is altogether independent of these motives. The truth, as I see it, lies somewhere in between. A sort of exhibitionism drives many to write or to seek a position on the stage. Joy in good work exists among artisans as well as among artists. Among unskilled laborers, the Florida Negro, who was asked to carry a handbag a short distance for which work he was to receive 25 cents, and who answered, "No, sir, boss, I has a quarter?" Boy, this is some really racist shit, is not altogether atypical. In some of the countries recently exploited by the European powers, the natives have been forced to work either with the whip and the rifle or by the imposition of taxes difficult to evade and sometimes collected by force. Schoolboys used formerly to be whipped whenever they had failed to master their lessons. The idea was that they could not be expected to do their work except if they feared the birchen twigs. I have not room here to consider at length the proper discipline of children by way of criticism of the doctrine that they must be ruled by fear. I quote the well-known words which the noble and unfortunate Lady Jane Grey spoke long ago to Roger Ascham, who described them in The Schoolmaster. One of the greatest benefits that ever God gave me is that he sent me so sharp and severe parents and so gentle a schoolmaster. For when I am in presence either of father or mother, whether I speak, keep silence, sit, stand, or go, eat, drink, be merry or sad, be sewing, playing, dancing, or doing anything else, I must do it, as it were, in such weight, measure, and number, even so perfectly as God made the world, or else I am so sharply taunted, so cruelly threatened, yea, presently, sometimes with pinches, nibs, and bobs, and other ways which I will not name for the honor I bear them, so without measure misordered, that I think myself in hell till time come that I must go to Mr. Elmer, who teacheth me so gently, so pleasantly, with such fair allurements to learning, that I think all the time nothing while I am with him. And when I am called from him, I fall on weeping, because whatsoever I do else but learning is full of grief, trouble, and whole misliking unto me. Wow. Perhaps a few parents of today, especially among the high aristocracy, torture their daughters in just this fashion. Yet threats and punishments are more enjoyed than fair allurements. I will not categorically deny the occasional usefulness of fear. However, as Lady Jane Grey so eloquently tells us from the 16th century, that which is associated with pleasure is likely to be studied with greater zeal and remembered better than that which is associated with pain. That makes sense. Okay, and I think we're going to stop there because that's the end of that chapter. And that's about time. 30 minutes is just about enough time to be listening to me babble on about something, isn't it? So, that is the end of part 3 of Little Blue Book number 1069, titled The Conquest of Fear, written by Leo Markun, copyright 1920s, something like that. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next part.